What's up guys, it's Pliskin here, and I was gonna do a series of videos. However, my recording equipment just shit itself and I don't know when it's gonna start working again. So I'm gonna take a video that originally was supposed to be a smaller idea and make it into a bigger one. I'm gonna start talking about how to improve a lot of the good ideas in Metal Gear Solid 4 and make an entirely original game out of that. So as a basic story premise, you're Snake, you're on a battlefield, it's desert, there's some snowy parts later on, maybe some wet environments. You're here to move your way through a battlefield, make it to a base, and destroy the Metal Gear there. Nothing too complicated. You're the Metal Gear man here to do some Metal Gear shit. The ideas I want to capitalize on from Metal Gear Solid 4 are the weapon system, with the M4 being that one weapon that you modify to your own advantage. I like the idea of having one or two guns that the entire game is based off of. I want to talk about a little bit of improvements on level design, and then I'm going to have a third category towards the end of the video where I just talk about other gameplay mechanics that I think would be cool. So with that being said, let's start breaking down how I would take the brilliant idea of the M4 from Metal Gear Solid 4, but execute it in a way that isn't dog shit. So in Metal Gear Solid 4, you have this rifle that's presented to you as ultimate customization. You modify this for whatever you need. Long range, close range, stealth, combat, explosive, shotgun, you decide what you're going to do with it. The thing is, Metal Gear Solid 4 goes on to feature so many different weapons, and even some weapons that act better in certain roles than your M4. So this idea of that one gun, your personal rifle, catered to your taste for a specific situation, kind of goes out the window. What I want to do is I want to take the basis of, I find this gun and over time it really becomes my gun. So for that purpose, every rifle on this battlefield is going to be some version of an AR. Now let me explain why. The AR-15 is held up for its customizability, first and foremost. Now an AR-15 is primarily made up of two parts, an upper and a lower. Your lower is where your trigger is, where your magazine goes into, and your upper is where the gas tubes are, where your barrel is, and where you're mounting a whole bunch of stuff. So in this revised Metal Gear Solid game, I want this system to be so in-depth that you're customizing your AR based on your upper and your lower. You're thinking about things like gas systems, you're thinking about things like magazine compatibility, you're thinking about things like different mounting options. Metal Gear Solid 4 has the M4 with the Picatinny rail systems. I want you to be able to put some Picatinny on some areas, M-lock on others, and key mod on some spots, and you'll find different attachments throughout the world, throughout the battlefield, that go together with these different attachment systems. I also want you to have to think about the environment you're in. Would you rather go with a direct impingement upper, so you'd be better off for the dusty or muddy environments? Or would you want to go with a short stroke gas piston system in your upper, like with the BRN 180, which takes your AR-15 lower and you can plug it into pretty much a AR-18 upper, so if you're going through like some aquatic environments, you don't have to worry about your AR blowing up on you because, the direct impingement system that most ARs work with doesn't really mesh well with water. So I want this level of intricacy. I want you to be thinking about barrel length as well. Do you want to use a caliber like 300 Blackout, where you can use a shorter barrel and be a little bit stealthier at close range? Do you want to use a full 20-inch barrel so you get the maximum damage potential out of your 5.56 rounds? Or do you want to upgrade your AR to an AR-10 so you have 308 and you're using this thing more like a DMR? Now, the way I would want this to start would be you just get like a stock M4A1. Nothing too special about it. You got those like old school iron sights. It's very what you see is what's there. But then as you go out on the battlefield, you'll see some guys on one side using an M16A2. You'll see some guys on the other side using like 416s or some other kind of piston AR, and while you're on the field, after you take guys out or sneak by them, you'll be able to cannibalize their different ARs. So Snake will come into this battlefield using the M4A1, but let's say during the early game, he sees an M16A2 with the longer barrel, and you decide that you want to use that thing to get more damage out of your 5.56. You can just swap out your M4 and pick up the M16A2, and in the early game this won't be such a big deal, because again you're starting off with a stock M4A1. But let's say now you get to the point where you have your M16A2 that you picked off of an enemy, and you cannibalize some other guy's barrel with an M16A2 that comes with the proprietary grenade launcher attachment that the M16A2 is known to have. You know, like that very kind of Hollywood iconic heat shield barrel. If you've ever seen Predator, go ahead and leave a like on this video and comment why it's so fucking awesome down in the comments below. But yeah, now you have an AR that's a little bit more customized. You have this M203 underneath it. So you have the option to use grenades to blow someone up. You can use smoke grenades to, smoke out a house that you have to clear. So, you have your M16A2, you find some smoke rounds, you think there's intel or a prisoner in one of these buildings, you pop a smoke in there, throw on your gas mask, and then you can sneak by all these guys without actually having to kill them or fight them, adding kind of a cool element of non-lethal stuff there. Let's say you get used to playing like this. All of a sudden, if you see, for example, an M16A4, you're not going to want to pick it up over your M16A2. Even though it has more customization options, your M16A2 is catering to how you want to play. So instead, what you're going to do is cannibalize the M16A4. Take the parts you desire. I don't know if you guys ever played Metro Exodus. Again, I don't have any footage of it because my recorder isn't working, but in that game you're utilizing an AK-74 and you find more parts for the AK off of enemy AKs, so you can take it back to a workstation and then edit your AK with their parts. Same thing here. If I see certain elements from another AR that I want to add to my AR, but I don't want to give up my AR because I've customized it so much, eventually throughout the world I'll find little Drebin stations. Drebin is another criminally underutilized element of Metal Gear Solid 4. You're sneaking through the battlefield and let's say here you see his little truck camouflaging into a building. You go over to it, you go inside, you can save your game, and you can customize your AR with different parts that you've found. Now, let's say I find this Drebin station with my smoke grenade launcher M16A2, and I get back to a Drebin workshop and I take, an M16A4 and I detach my grenade launcher from the M16A2, and then Drebin helps me tool it to be able to put it on the M16A4. And then now I can put a whole bunch of different kinds of optics that I found throughout the battlefield onto the A4. So I keep that style of gameplay I had with the M16A2, but now I have a tool bench where I can rework it onto a better version of that gun. So let's say I'm using the M4A1 and I find another upper on it that has a Picatinny rail system and it allows me to attach optics onto the top. It even has the capabilities to mount a suppressor. So I could take off the stock upper of my M4A1 and I could put this new upper on it that allows so much more customization. Eventually, as I keep going through the game and I keep stopping at these different Drebin stations for these different upgrades, adjusting to my playstyle, I eventually make an AR that's perfectly suited to my style of play when I'm going through the battlefield. And at this point here, the only thing I'm really going to be looking out for are certain attachments that I could be putting onto it. Snake could start the game with an M4A1 every time, but then, halfway through the game, he could have an AR-10 that has a 3 to 6 times optic on the top. Or he could, end off with a Honey Badger with a built-in suppressor. Or he could end off with a Block 2 M4. So as you're going through the battlefield, you take this M4A1 you start with, and you adjust it to whatever you want. You can even have certain, areas or certain boss fights or certain situations really adept for certain styles of AR. So if I come to an area and I realize it's very long-range canyons, I see the glints of snipers, I can go back to the nearest Drebin station, I can upgrade my M4A1 to an SR25 or a full-on AR-10, and then come back there and then do a little bit of sniping. Or let's say I'm coming near a boss fight that's underground and very tight-knit tunnels, I might want to take my M4A1 and I might want to take it to Drebin and get it retooled to take 300 Blackout and have a really tiny barrel, so I can move around those corners easier. So on the one hand, you have the capability to adjust your AR for however you want for the battlefield, but then you also have the ability to recognize certain situations, certain layouts, certain boss fights, certain enemies, and be like, okay, I know exactly how I need to tool my weapon to be able to fight them. And of course, you can do so much with non-lethal here with the AR. You can, let's say you can take it to Drebin and retool it to be able to shoot out pepper balls, so it just stuns your enemies instead of killing them. Let's say you put a non-lethal shotgun or non-lethal grenade launcher underneath there. It's like however you want to play, this gun will cater to it. So everyone might be playing the same Metal Gear game, but their Snake has a different rifle. It stops being just a rifle that you pick up and it starts becoming your rifle. So you kind of build an attachment with it. Now we can apply this to the pistol that you're carrying around as well. Let's say Snake starts off with a stock Beretta M92. As you go through the battlefield, you find different ways to tool it up, switching out the slide, making modifications with Drebin, and you turn it into the Trank pistol from Metal Gear Solid 2. Or maybe you turn it into a long-barreled, very easy action, smooth trigger, like quick firing weapon, so if your AR jams up, you can whip this out and fire. So it adds a little bit of nuance, so you have the option to turn it into a trank gun. However, because you might have to worry about stuff like jamming or environmental hazards, it might be a better idea to have this work as just a really good combat pistol for when your AR craps itself. So there's so many different choices. You get all this selection like MGS4, however, it all plays into this idea of your personalized weapons, rather than just random weapons that you buy and then you see whether or not they're a waste of your time. And then of course, in regards to other weapons, maybe there's a pistol that all the enemies use that you can grab off of one of them and then shoot a couple that are around you. Maybe there's a bolt action sniper you can pick up in very specific areas. Maybe there's a one-time use Stinger missile that you can find here and there for vehicles and that kind of stuff. PKM, LMG, so if you're holding out a position, you can use the PKM to clear out this area. Kind of like how in Metal Gear Solid 5 you can carry 3 weapons on you. Let's take this mentality and be like, okay, your AR is going to be that weapon on your hip. Something you always have with you. Your M9, whether it's a trank or whether it's a really fast shooting lethal pistol, is going to be on your hip. And then some of these other more niche weapons that you'll find on the battlefield, that'll all be single purpose. So the PKM is that LMG. The bolt action is that sniper. The Stinger is that rocket launcher. If you want to carry one with you because you might think that you'll need it later, or can't upgrade your AR to suit a new kind of situation, you can just throw it on your back. But that's the weapon that's going to be switched out a lot for whatever you find on the battlefield, whereas your AR and your pistol are more so your own. So this brings us to the world design. Now, I like how Metal Gear Solid 4 has these different levels that are all just attached to each other that make up this greater area. I don't want this game to be like Metal Gear Solid 5 where there's just open expanses of nothing, so you're just walking around and, aimlessly sniping guys from super far away. I want certain areas to be able to allow you to snipe or to use your AR like a DMR, but I want this to be not so much a linear game, but a much more focused game. There is a set level, you know where the boundaries are. Let's say you start by a beach, you make your way into this destroyed city, you go through a little bit of hillside mountainous wilderness, and then you end off on this snowy base, and around it you have Halo 1 style canyons letting you know exactly where the limits of the level are. Have some hidden underground areas, have different random pathways that can get you different ways to get to the top. So it's your goal is to get to the top of that mountain, however there's so many ways to get there down this really not necessarily funneled or hallway feeling area, but through an area that has limits. So let's say you're starting off at the start there and you see a city, you see a rocky cliffside, and you see kind of like a road that leads upwards. You can choose which one of those you go on, and they might wind and intertwine, so you're going in and out of those different areas, but they're all moving upwards towards that base at the top. That would add replayability too, because, not only are you adapting your AR and your pistol for these different pathways you're taking, because they might present different challenges, different enemies, and that sort of thing, but it's also new experiences. On the note of new experiences, because we're focusing these areas in a set level that isn't like open and can be a little more curated to a specific set piece design, we can randomize some of the enemies. Let's say there's one kind of dense city street area that you have to fight through at one point. Let's say on one playthrough you go through there and there's a guy with an LMG up in a building just controlling a street. So that playthrough becomes about figuring out a way to take out that LMG guy. Let's say there's another playthrough where there's a bunch of Humvees moving through the road and you need to sneak through the buildings. And let's say another time you load up the game, it's just a total all-out like chaos between two sides fighting each other. You can randomize the kind of enemies that spawn in these zones so it feels fresh for the player every time. And again, because this is an open world where we have to adapt the enemies to an open world design, and these are like encased kind of levels that are all just interconnected, we have more freedom to control what's going on in here. So adding in random enemies is much more feasible. And again, this ties into, adapting your AR for the situation, because let's say, one area has a lot of guys with gas masks and all of a sudden you can't use your like smoke. And another area has guys with armor, so maybe using, 5.56 out of a shorter barrel isn't such a good idea. You adapt your weapons to whatever challenge is there. And if we can randomize these challenges every time, then it always feels fresh, it always feels like you have to adapt, you're thinking more, therefore you are playing more. Instead of just finding that one exploit for these areas and then just doing the same thing every time you play. Now for this last section, I just want to talk a little bit about different mechanics that could be, introduced into this game. I talked a lot about the AR modification system. I talked about the random Drebin points that act as like save points and customization areas. I want to add in kind of like, how Snake Eater has a percentage thing for how well the enemy can see you? I want to do something like that, except with sound. So when you're using your AR or your pistol, or when you're carrying more or less, you see a percentage for the sound you're going to be emitting. So let's say, for example, I'm using an AR-10, I have a PKM on my back and my Beretta is like super thick, and I'm just carrying a whole bunch of different stuff. Let's say some body armor and a shit ton of grenades. When I walk, let's say I have a 88% sound. So enemies will be able to hear me from much closer, over certain other sounds in the environment. But then let's say I'm using just a honey badger, and my Beretta is just, optimized tranq pistol, and I'm not carrying anything else. My sound rate will be closer to, let's say, 15%, and it'll be much easier to crawl, crouch, or walk past enemies without them hearing me. On the note of like a reflex mode sort of thing, I would want to include something that's a little more involved on the player's behalf. So instead of, an enemy sees you and then all of a sudden you go into this mode where you can clean up your mess, I would like a kind of mode where if you dodge an enemy's attack, or if you disarm them really quick, or if you do a CQC move while they're not suspecting you, then you get like this brief little period where you can like shoot something, dive out of the way, throw something, whatever you're gonna do. Kind of like Resident Evil 3 Remake's dodge mechanic, where if I press dodge at the right time, I get this kind of reflex mode thing where I can just like zoom in on enemies' heads and get like a nice critical shot. But it's more of a reward for my quick reflexes rather than something there to pick up the slack for when I'm playing carelessly. I want the level design to be tight enough where I don't need to have like a system for marking enemies. I just want to provide a lot of high vantage points or areas that are very clearly safe zones for stealth. So rather than, marking every enemy on the map, I can get a look and feel for who's there, what's happening at all times. I want shit to be really well telegraphed through, audio cues. Like if you hear a PKM going off, I want you to know it's a PKM. And then visual cues. If you see the muzzle flash from I'm a PKM, you know that muzzle flash is specific to the PKM. So stuff like this, where you can recognize the enemies that are on the field, certain areas of advantage, certain areas of disadvantage. I want the levels to kind of be designed like that. I want to put in a little kind of a hub world, not like Metal Gear Solid 5's mother base, but like a little plane or a boat that, you know, when Snake is in a safe location, let's say he can attach a Fulton on himself and he'll be warped over to this hub world. And at the hub world, you can talk with your codec crew. Let's say your commander is Meryl. She's the one heading this whole operation or whatever. And if you go back to her, you can tell her about certain things that you've seen on the battlefield, things that you've noticed. Maybe you have like a camera where you can take a picture of certain enemies or certain areas that you see, and Meryl will give you like some tips and tricks about them. Let's say you have this like codec crew member that's all about the different flora and fauna you find. Let's say you can bring her back certain plants and she'll be like, oh, I can make you trank darts with this. Oh, I can make you a better ration with this. Or, oh, here's a little bit of a health item that'll help you with certain bleeding effects or bone breaking effects, that sort of thing. I want kind of like a snake eater type of health system where different injuries need to be treated through different ways. And I want this stuff to be more like concrete items, not like a menu viewer where you heal yourself, but something you need to carry on you in case you need this for if you get hurt that way. And this person at your hub can be the person that makes this stuff for you. This also gives purpose to the different flora and fauna in the environments, because you'll know as you communicate more with this person that if you get this stuff, you'll be able to make this, and that'll help you with, you know, insert the blank here. Have Drebin show up at your hub world and be there to also help you modify your AR. So if you want to go back to your hub and while you're at the hub you want to modify your AR, he's there. Drebin can act as like this omnipresent like RE4 merchant type of thing, where whether you're in the hub or in safe points in the battlefield, you can find him and you can upgrade your weapons that way. And then put little fun like details and Easter eggs and stuff like that here. Maybe somewhere where you can like find music out in the open world. When you're in the hub, I'd like you to be able to edit your camo there. I don't like how you can like, you know, call in random camos, or in Snake Eater how you're constantly opening up menus. If you go into a new area and you think you need different kinds of camo, you can head back to the hub, change into it, and then be dropped off back in that area. But you gotta kind of commit to a camouflage, so you're not just changing it willy-nilly. And that camouflage will be part of that decision-making process when you're in a level, figuring out what are the power positions and where are the positions of disadvantage. While you're in the open world, I want the ability to be able to befriend prisoners, or, you know, certain guys fighting the battle, or random civilians on the field. If you give them recovery items, maybe they'll give you hints about, you know, certain fields that you'll see in the future, or how to deal with certain enemies or certain weapons a certain way. If you extract prisoners and bring them back to your hub, maybe you can find them and they give you certain perks, like, oh, if you find this plant and bring it to this lady, she'll be able to make you something that'll make sure you don't lose stamina as fast in higher altitudes. That sort of thing. I'd also like to nerf CQC. I don't like how CQC in Metal Gear works against almost every enemy. Let's say if you're coming across weaker enemies, sure, you can CQC them, but have certain enemy types counter CQC, kind of like the frogs in Metal Gear Solid 4. So you'll have to use stuff like a knife for stealth, or maybe you have a knife that you can also, you know, upgrade as much as you upgrade the AR and the M9, and you can make it kind of like a taser knife and use it non-lethally like that if that's more of your style. So yeah, this video was originally supposed to be just a sandbox discussion of Metal Gear Solid 4's M4. However, I think, like, you know, talking about how Metal Gear Solid 4 could have been a game where you focus on your personalized weapons, where the battlefields are much more dynamic than they are set PC, and where you have all of these different methods of interaction with a hub, with your weapon system, with different collectibles you find in the open world, with prisoners, with intel gathering, with all this kind of stuff. Niche weapons that you find. I think a really interesting game can be made from this, with the core of it again being customizing your weapons and having them end up feeling like your weapons. Have a smaller world, a smaller hub, but then pack it with dense details, dense upgrades for your guns, with flora and fauna, with interesting enemies and allies to find and discover, and randomize this stuff a little bit. You know, the allies don't have to be like specific characters. They could just be, you know, one playthrough you find a guy that like tells you how to create a certain medicine, another playthrough you find a guy that has a really nice optic for your AR. Like, the sky's the limit with this kind of stuff, but shrink it down in size. Just because we're at a generation now where we have like the Xbox Series X and the PS5 doesn't mean we should push so far beyond. Maybe we should hone in our limits a little bit and create something densely packed with detail. That's replayable, that's customizable, and that's a very intense but rewarding stealth experience by the end of it, where how you react to the world and how much you invest in collecting certain things in the world affects everything from your weapons to your own like health to how you play through the game. So yeah, anyways, this has been Pliskin, and this is how I would have redone a Metal Gear Solid 4 type of Metal Gear game. Let me know what your thoughts are down below, and I'll see you guys in the next video.
This is Solid Snake. Hey, subscribe to Pliskin Boy. God damn it.
You heard him.